and responsible for Turkey REACH chemical registration regulation and for the office in Turkey. Today's webinar will have two sessions. During the first webinar session, I will give an information and updates on Turkey REACH. After that, Priyanka will give an update on UK REACH. At the end of the webinar, Q&A session will start. You are very welcome to write your questions under the next column, and we can answer it during the Q&A session. The first session will begin with the latest updates and relevant information on Turkey REACH chemical registration and pre-registration. During this session, you will learn the latest updates, information on Turkey REACH, and practical information of registration, such as who should register, pre-register, and scope of exemptions. Then I will mention about the timeline of registration, pre-registration, and expected fees. To know how Turkey REACH affects non-Turkish manufacturers, this webinar will give an information of owner representative, joint registration, and CF. Then I will briefly inform you about hazard criteria, classification, packaging, and labeling procedures. If you have any questions regarding Turkey REACH, please do not hesitate to write your questions in the next column during the presentation or during the next session. Turkey REACH, as a short Turkish version, KKDIK, was issued from 23rd of December 2017. The name of the bylaw can be translated as Registration, Evaluation, Authorization, and Restriction of Chemicals. KKDIK, or Turkey REACH, covers manufacturing, placing on the market, or use of the substances and articles on the market more or equal to 1 ton per year. Ministry of Environment and Urbanization is mainly responsible for Turkey REACH regulation. However, the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, Ministry of Science, Industry and Technology, and Ministry of Customs and Trade are also responsible for certain substances. When Turkey REACH was issued, it replaced two regulations. One of them is the inventory and control of chemicals, and the other is restriction and prohibition of hazardous substances and mixtures. The last regulation is for preparation and issue of safety data sheets for dangerous substances, but please note that this regulation is still valid until the 31st of December 2023. With the new amendment on November 2019, two new definitions were added for the substances or mixtures. The new definitions are for industrial usage and for professional usage. Also, cyanide compounds were added in the restricted substance list. Substances and articles which are more than 1 ton per year and not on the list of exemptions, restrictions, or out of scope need to be registered. Non-Turkish manufacturers need to attain owner representative to be able to register and pre-register. Total 67 chemicals are restricted according to Turkey REACH. However, 5 more substances will be restricted in different dates. You can see the list of substances which are out of scope, such as radioactive substances and mixtures, non-isolated intermediates, and wastes. Hazardous substances and mixtures and purpose of defense are also out of scope under the Turkey REACH. Cosmetics as the final products are out of scope, but the substances for cosmetics are included. Substances which are in the temporary storage or in a free zone are also out of scope. For the procedure exemptions, medicinal products for human and veterinary use, food and feeding products are totally exempted. Biocidal producers and plant protection products are exempted from the registration. Polymers are also exempted from the registration, but monomers or other reactant of polymers needs to be registered when they meet certain criteria. Product and process-oriented research and development products can be exempted for 5 years once the notification is submitted to the Ministry. For the important dates, the pre-registration period is now open until the end of this year. Registration will start on the 1st of January 2021 until the 31st of December 2023. Companies which have done the pre-registration until the 31st of December 2020 can manufacture or export while registration is on the process. However, companies which have not done the pre-registration can manufacture or export the substances after the registration is completed. Please note that the tonnage ban doesn't affect the deadlines. The pre-registration needs to be done through pre-CF form with substance identity, CAS and EC number, enrolled in the supply chain through online registration system. The registration will be conducted with dossier submission, including substance identity, test results, information about usage, risk management, and exposure. Please note that the procedure is same for all substances regardless their phase-in status. There is no fee requirement for the pre-registration from the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization. The registration fees for 2020 and further are not officially published yet, but here you can see the approximate registration fees. The registration fees depend on the size of the enterprises, tonnage band, and submission type. No fee shall be taken from the Ministry for the substances in the 1 to 10 tonnage band which have all of the information in their registration dossier according to Turkey REACH requirements. Foreign companies who sell substances to Turkey need to have an ONI representative which resides in Turkey. The roles and responsibilities of OR is defined in Turkey REACH. The responsibilities are to regulate the pre-registration registration procedures for non-Turkish company, to provide information about latest updates for safety datasheets, to communicate with downstream users, to represent non-Turkish company in CF or consortium after the pre-registration. Companies which have done the pre-registration will be part of the CF platform. Under the CF, it is possible to arrange consortiums for the companies manufacture the same chemical substance and apply for joint registration. The hazardous criteria is parallel with the EU standards. For the hazardous substances and procedures, there are 2 regulations. One of them is the Bylaw of Classification, Packaging and Labeling, known as CEA in Turkish, and Bylaw of Safety Datasheets, known as GBF in Turkish. After that, requirements in Turkey REACH Annex 2 shall be regulated. Substances under the GTS criteria are needed to be authorized or notified to the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization. Hazard criteria and labeling procedures are parallel with EU standards. The hazard classifications are physical, health, and environmental. Labels of hazardous substances and mixtures have to be harmonized with the regulation. Submission of labels are not required, but the copy of the safety datasheets have to be submitted to the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization. The safety datasheets has standard 16 sessions, and words such as non-toxic or not harmful are not allowed. Thank you for your interest and for your time. SSS Europe provides only representative services regarding Turkey Reach with a local office in Istanbul. If you want to stay updated for the latest information about chemical regulations, please follow us on LinkedIn. You can find our LinkedIn page in our YouTube description below. If you have more questions, you can write it in the section on the right side so we can answer it during the QA session. Now there will be UK Reach session and then QA session will begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Zainab, for your presentation on Turkey Reach. Hello, everyone. I am Mrs. Priyanka Manapure representing Sustainability Support Services. And for today's webinar session, we would have a discussion on Brexit and UK Reach. Today's webinar would aim to discuss on what are the latest updates of Brexit, what are the key events of the transition period, and what can be the implications of Brexit and the transition period to UK Reach. So let us begin with the latest updates on Brexit. Brexit, ever since 2016, had been the withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union, with several key events from 2016 to 2019, and with a majority of 124 votes in favour of the EU Withdrawal Agreement Bill, the UK, in a historical event, has now left the EU on 31st January 2020. The UK has formally left the EU with a withdrawal deal, and it has now gone into a transition period. The transition is a period during which all of the current rules will stay the same, thereby allowing the UK and the EU to negotiate their future relationship, and it is due to last until the end of December 2020. The UK will need to abide by EU rules during this transition period and pay into the EU budget, but it will lose membership of its institutions. During this period, the UK will effectively remain in EU's customs union and as a single market, but it will be outside the political institutions and there will be no British members in the European Parliament. Also, Prime Minister Mr. Boris Johnson's priority during this transition period would be to negotiate a trade deal with the EU, since the UK wants as much as possible access for its goods and services to the EU. The EU could take weeks to agree on a formal negotiating mandate, since all the remaining 27 member states and the European Parliament has to agree on it. This means that the formal talks are expected to begin in March 2020 for the trade deal. Post-transition period, the UK Reach would come into effect, and all those companies placing chemical substances onto the markets of the UK would have to comply with UK Reach regulation. So these are the key events of transition period. 31st January 2020 was the day when Brexit was implemented. During this period, there was a document which was released by the EU, and it was the document on Council decision, which included the details of the proposed EU goals for the negotiations. EU-UK trade talks are expected to begin in early March 2020 once this document is approved by the EU Parliament and the member state representatives. The withdrawal deal allows the transition period to be extended for 1 or 2 years. However, the UK and EU will have to mutually decide on this, and the deadline for it is 30 June 2020. The UK government insists that a comprehensive trade agreement can be negotiated by the end of the year, and it has passed a legislation making it illegal for the government to extend the transition period beyond 31st December. But most industrial bodies and trade experts have indicated it to be impossible, and the best that can be achieved is agreement on principles with separate agreements on different sectors and issues taking place next year. If no trade deal has been agreed and ratified by the end of this December 2020, then the UK may face the prospects of tariffs on exports to the EU. So, during this transition period, all the registrations, approvals, authorizations, and classifications in place before the UK left the EU would continue to be valid. EU REACH would still continue to apply to UK registrations. The process for registering new chemicals under REACH remains unchanged. The UK companies are still required to register with ECHA. The UK will recognize all new registrations, approvals, authorizations, and classifications granted by the EU. Also, the Health and Safety Executive will not be able to act as a leading authority to conduct certain assessments under the Plant Protection Products, Biocides, and REACH regulations. UK based businesses will have the same rights as EU based businesses to have their cases accepted and processed by leading authorities based in other EU member states. The Health and Safety Executive will also continue to process product applications under the Plant Protection Product Regulations and Biocidal Products Regulation for the UK market under the National Authorization route. So let us now talk about how the UK REACH registrations would be applicable during this transition period. The transition period has started from 31st January 2020 and it is likely to end by December of this year. So during this transition period, the UK chemicals industry is regulated through a framework which is largely based on EU legislation. The European Chemicals Agency is the lead body in implementing this framework and the main piece of legislation is REACH regulation. All those companies producing and exporting chemicals from outside the EU and the UK have to comply with REACH by procuring the services of an only representative. Post-transition period, the EU REACH regulation will be brought into UK law by the European Union Act of 2018. With this, after the amendment, the EU REACH would be referred as UK REACH regulation in UK and the regulatory system would be UK REACH. So post-transition period, ECHA would have no role on the registration of chemicals for the UK exports. Instead, it would be the Health and Safety Executive which would act as the lead UK regulatory authority and it would enable the registration of new chemicals through a UK IT system. If you are a non-EU, non-UK based exporter to UK, all those chemicals which are to be brought into UK will have to be registered under UK REACH post-transition period. Let us consider a situation where you have already registered your chemical and you are accessing the UK market currently through a UK based only representative. So, it would be the role of your UK based only representative to grandfather, that is notify about your registration to the HSE within 120 days post transition period. This will allow you to export your chemical for another period of 2 years and during this time period you would have to completely register your chemical. The second scenario is you have already registered your chemical and you are accessing the UK market via EU based only representative. So, it would be the role of your EU based OR to transfer your EU registration to a UK based OR. However, before transferring a registration, you will need to consider how this would affect your operations in the EU and your ability to access the EU market. Also, post transition period, if you have not registered your substance and you want to access the UK market, then in that case, all non-UK manufacturers exporting to the UK will need to ensure that the substance is registered with the UK agency through a UK based only representative service. Registrations made by UK based entities will be classed as new registrations and full registration duties would apply to them. So for this, Sustainability Support Services has already set up a UK based OR entity to support our existing and new potential clients to be able to comply with the challenges posed due to Brexit on substances exported to UK. If you have any queries regarding UK REACH registrations or compliance activity, you can directly contact us. So this was all about the discussion on Brexit and UK REACH. Thank you very much. The session is now open for your queries on Turkey REACH and UK REACH. I request you all to drop your queries through the dialog box or the query box that is open at the right hand corner of your screen. All these FAQs will be combined into a document and it will be shared with all our companies individually. So we have another 10 minutes before we can conclude today's webinar. Hello everyone, we are still live and I request you all to drop your queries before the concluding session. Okay, so that's all from today's webinar session. We have another webinar lined up for the coming month, and the details of this upcoming webinar will be shared with you shortly. Thank you very much for your attention. See you until next time. Bye bye.